what I'm going to do today is to share with you the experience of Delta in building EV charging infrastructure. So to start with, so if we look at today, we have more than 1.8 million EVs on Indian roads. However, when we talk about these large numbers, most of it belongs to two-wheeler. As Dr. Batra was mentioning, that the biggest challenge at this moment on the EV charging is on the cost part. But in two-wheelers, the cost parity is already achieved. So that is where we do not see any challenge. But while we talk about this number of 1.8 million today, the expectation is this number is going to reach 40 to 50 million by 2030. And when you talk about the size of the market, it is around $2 billion right now. It is expected to go to $7 billion by 2025. As of today, the number of charging stations which are operational is around 5,100. Now, this does not mean that these are the only charging stations which are available. These are the charging stations which is up and running. So I'll cover what I mean the difference between up and running and others. But starting from where Dr. Batra actually started the discussion, what is the real challenge in adoption of the EV? The first thing, if you talk as a user, is related to the high cost, which Dr. Batra mentioned. The second is related to the options available to the EV charger. When you go for buying a ICE vehicles, there are multiple options available. But when you look for EV, there are limited options. However, when you go next, even if you have options available, what does go to the mind of a user? The first things which comes into the mind of the user is the range. How many kilometers the vehicle will run. The second is how much time will it take to charge the vehicle. See, you go for an ICE vehicle, you can get your petrol tank full in less than 2-3 minutes. But here, if you go to a fast charging station, it is going to take more than 1 hour. The third challenge which comes to a user's mind is whether I'll get a charging station on time. Would I be able to see a charging station? So this is the one challenge which comes into the user's mind. Now, this is when you're talking about the user. Now think from a perspective of a person who is setting up the charging infrastructure. So what we call in our industry as charge point operators. Now for them, the challenge is in terms of the CapEx and the OpEx. They are making a lot of investment. But if the adoption of the vehicles is less, the footfall on the charging station is less. So the payback period actually goes up. Then you look, the third key player in this industry is the utilities. How much power they make it available for the charging infrastructure. So I try to address all these critical aspects one by one. The first thing, when you talk from a user perspective, the first it is basically what is there in your mind. It is not that you have to compare it with an ICE vehicle. It is basically a mind shift. When you are running a fossil fuel vehicle, you have to go to a petrol pump or a diesel outlet. No, here you don't need to do it. Most of the time, the charging will happen at your home. So anybody who is owning an EV vehicle, 60% of the time the charging happens at their own house. So that is a big change. You don't have to go to the petrol station. Around 15 to 30% of the time, the charging will happen at your office, shopping mall, or a commercial complex. That is again where you don't need to wait for charging the vehicle. And only for 5 to 10% of the time, it will happen in a public charging infrastructure. Our public charging infrastructure is very, very critical because it creates a connect between the charging which you do at your home or at the various other commercial places. It is essential. So the challenge with respect to whether you, if you look from a perspective, you are going to take a lot of time, it is the mind shift which one has to take care of. Now talking with respect to the evolution of the charging. Now this is related to when you talk about the vehicles. Here if you look at the critical components, the onboard charger, which is a component which is inside the vehicle, there is a significant change which has happened in terms of development of vehicles onboard charger. So if you look at vehicles in India, then it is mostly in the bottom part, which is when you're talking about 3 kilowatt up to 10 kilowatt. So all your Nexons, XUV 400, MG, Kona, all this will fall under this stage. When you talk about higher, then it is only vehicles like Porsche, BMW, Mercedes, those will go into that. And 43 kilowatt, as of now, globally, it is only related to Renault. When you talk about battery capacity, this is directly related to the range of the vehicle. So when you, here in India, mostly most of the vehicles are between 30 to 60 kilowatt hour. Now, if you have to correlate between the capacity and possibly the range, then you have to probably multiply by 6.5 to 7 to arrive at how many kilometers the vehicle will run. 60 to 120 kilowatt hour, it is very limited vehicles. When here in India, probably you can talk about only Kia EV6, then Mercedes and those kind of vehicles. However, when you go on to 120 kilowatt hour and all, then these are some vehicles like Ford and Porsche and all those. The top chart is related to the charging technologies. Now here you are talking about the public charging infrastructure or the DC fast chargers. So most of the vehicles in India, possibly 50 kilowatt to 200 kilowatt is more than enough for a few more years. However, as you go into the e-bus segment, then possibly you talk about charging up to 240 kilowatt. 350 kilowatt is a clear case, a very individual case which is related to GMC Hummer. This is a global application. Now I talk about some of the trends in the EV charging infra. As the industry is growing, the focus is shifting to a faster charging. As I mentioned earlier, it used to start with a charger which was based on GBT, somewhere around 15 kilowatt. It is already shifted to 50 kilowatt, 60 kilowatt and more. But it is moving to higher rating chargers and also how the charging can be faster. In terms of serviceability or uptime, how the uptimes can go up. And most important is with respect to upgradability. Now when I talk about upgradability, it is more to do with the software upgradability. Because the software requirement will keep on changing from as you get more and more innovation. There are multiple aspects with respect to solution, how the business operation has to run. I'll cover some of them in subsequent slides. So when you talk about the EV's chargers will be in an open location. So one has to take care of the noise part and also with respect to the radiation part. The technology is evolving. As I said earlier, one of the biggest challenges in terms of time which takes into for charging. Now here, Delta along with GM Motors US is working on a project funded by Department of Energy US. And we are trying to develop a charger which can charge 180 miles in less than 10 minutes. So this is a 400 kilowatt charger. It comes with a solid state transformer technology with a weight less than 4 times a conventional transformer and with dimensions less than half of a conventional DC fast charger. So this is the kind of efforts which are happening in the industry to address the challenge, how the charging can be faster. Now this is with respect to a digital world where you talk about digital communication. When you talk about digital communication, you talk about communication with the charger, how the charger will communicate with the vehicle, the site connectivity. So wherein the technology which makes sure that you are able to transport enough data so that the site diagnosis can be done remotely. And when you talk about grid connectivity, you talk about IEC 61850. Now this is an international protocol which talks about communication between different components of substation. When you talk about different components, it could be related to the production, it could be related to control and measurement and intelligent electronic devices. So basically here, it helps in communicating, connecting the entire components of the grid so that there is a better management of the grid. In terms of power control, then again we talk about power control related to an individual charger. It could be related to a specific site wherein one location could, one charging powerhouse could be charging multiple vehicles. So in terms of what is the dynamic power sharing between those vehicles, and also with respect to grid power sharing. When I talk about grid power sharing, it is with respect to how do you integrate the chargers with a complete renewable energy source or with a storage device. And then you talk about the innovation in the service. When you talk innovation, you talk about on-call service, proactive service, and different revenue generation model on service. Now, all of us have been talking about EV charging as a green initiative because it works, it does not work on fossil fuel, but it still takes power from a grid. The grid works on a fossil fuel. So is it really green? So if you have to address this question, how do you make sure that you connect the important element? So wherein you talk about EV, a complete EV charging station, how it can be converted into a microgrid. So what does it mean? It means the EV charging station, instead of taking a power only from a fossil fuel grid, it can use a clean energy from a solar system or a wind system. It can have, because that is intermittent in nature, then you need to provide an energy storage device. This energy storage system will help in increasing the utilization of the renewable energy system. And then, while here you are talking about using a grid, using a renewable energy source, but again, if you have to look at, can you use EV also as a storage device, wherein when the load is high, when the grid has power available, it can feed to the vehicle, and if in a peak time, the grid requires power from the grid, from the vehicle, then vehicle will support the grid. So vehicle to grid applications kind of thing. So all this in terms of optimization between managing the multiple energy sources, that's done through an energy management system. So these are multiple cases which already have been done. In India also, we have done 2 projects. Similar in nature, we call it as a carport application or a green charging station. So this is something which really, if we are talking about setting up a green EV, then this is something which has to be considered. Now this is one live application which a project which Delta has done along with Brandenburg University, Germany. Now this project is, as I mentioned, is related to vehicle to grid application. So there are 6 ultra fast chargers, 6 into 150 kilowatt, and 3 vehicle to grid bi-directional charging and discharging points. Now this is a project we had done in 2020. So the objective of this is to balance between the grid operators and the EV owners, the demand and supply part. Now talking about the overall portfolio, I'm not talking about Delta portfolio here, I'm talking about the industry. So there are different applications, public, commercial, fleet, and residential applications. So in terms of hardware, we will have the EV chargers. Software, you talk about this software which come on the application side also, the central monitoring systems, or it could be the mobile apps. So e-Amrit is the government initiative, but most of the other charge point operators have their own apps. And then you talk about the service model, multiple service models, which could be based on a use-oriented service or based on a product-oriented service. And then you talk about multiple products which Delta tries to give, apart from the chargers. So now I'm going to talk about few trends in the industry. So basically, if you look at innovation, now EV will, since it is a external installation, so space is critical, and then you talk about some applications which are under study, wherein you could have a pop-up charging pole. So when not in use, it will go underground, but when it is required, it can pop up. Similarly, when you talk about if you don't have space for installing the charger, then possibly the charger can be installed on the ceiling. Now this could be a common application in India as well. So where you have stacked parking stations. So this is very common in Taiwan. So wherein EV chargers can work along with the power parking structure also. Different business models. So this is one when you talk about integrating the EV charger with a signage. This is something which is already happening in some smart cities in India. So it is a business model instead of making a revenue model based out of only charging the vehicles. It is a revenue model which comes based on branding, maybe based on some entertainment, and then retail and coffee shop, car wash. This is something which is business models. Now a little bit talking about Delta. So in terms of our focus is mainly on Make in India. So even for the chargers which we give in the market, most of it is designed, developed, and made in India. So we have 3 manufacturing plants, all are green building certified. Krishnagiri is a 120 acre plant. So while we make units in India, there is a lot of effort which goes in terms of research and development as well. So Delta globally has 72 R&D centers focusing on power generation, which is mentioned about PVI, wind, energy storage, transmission and distribution, a lot of work we do for railways and power quality control. And power utilization, this is the rectifier, energy management systems, and the EV structure. Delta spends 6.5% of the revenues on research and development globally. And so far we have more than 11,000 patents. Now when we were talking about, so this talks about some of the partnerships which we do. So GM Motors entered into an agreement with Pilot, which is basically a truck stop point operator, which means where the trucks will actually stop. We get into an agreement with EVgo, and this is a project in US, around 1,000 charging stations we are working with them, which are all rating 350 kilowatt and higher. So this is, I'm just showing this slide to show that how the industry is working into different partnership models. Now, so what, in terms of experience, the experience which we are talking is not related only to the off-board chargers, which I discussed so far. Our experience comes in terms of a lot of component, and then we are talking about the electric vehicle components. Now this is related to different power components. When you talk about power component, onboard charging modules, electric vehicle charge controllers. So all this, we work with all the major brands across the globe. Apart from power modules, we also work on traction motors, could be between 100 kilowatt to 400 kilowatt traction motors. When I mentioned power modules, then it could be 4 kilowatt up to 22 kilowatt. So this gives us some experience in terms of what actually OEMs are working on, because this is basically the starting point for any EV. So with that experience, we try to bring technology in advance on what is to be done with the charging infrastructure. A little bit on our experience. We have close to a decade experience on EV charging, and so far installed base of more than 1.5 million chargers across the globe. So when we talk this experience, then it is the charger going from 3.5 kilowatt going up to 350 kilowatt, as I mentioned. In India, we have done around 7,000 EV chargers, and we work with all stakeholders, whether it is government authorities, EV charging infra players, vehicle OEMs, and the fleet operators. That's my last slide. Thank you.